Daylight savings time is bad. Don't take my word for it. Go Google daylight savings time and see how far you have to scroll down before you start seeing articles explaining how it's ineffective and stories about lawmakers across the country trying to get rid of it. Every year, more and more people are learning the facts about daylight savings time, and somehow, every year, we keep the tradition alive. But first, a crash course on the history. Daylight savings time was adopted by the US and many other countries in the 1910s as a way to save energy. The thinking was, if there's more light later in the day, people will stay outside and won't need to light up their houses. That thinking was wrong. Studies show daylight savings time doesn't lead to any significant energy savings, but does lead to serious health concerns and an overall loss in work productivity. Now, this isn't going to be a detailed list of the many sins of daylight savings time. There are already hundreds of articles and videos covering that online. If you'd like a recommendation, CGP Grey has a terrific video about daylight savings time on YouTube. No, today we're talking about how the tradition continues despite the overwhelming evidence that it probably shouldn't. And whenever the subject of ending daylight savings time comes up, it's usually killed by one of three things. Number one, apathy. Good or not, we've been doing daylight savings time for a century now, and while it's true that it does more harm than good, it doesn't quite do enough harm for people to care. When you stack up getting rid of daylight savings time against things like immigration, racial injustice, ISIS, you get the idea. It's just hard to work up the motivation to make a big fuss over changing the clocks twice a year. Without public concern, it's hard politically to make big changes like getting rid of daylight savings time, though the tide may be changing on this one. In the last few years, as more and more people become aware of the problem, there is growing support for finally putting an end to daylight savings time. Number two, children. If you leave the clocks cranked back, you run into the issue of children getting up and going to school before the sun has come up, which leaves a lot of parents worried about safety. Leave it cranked forward and you've got kids running around at night getting into trouble. So a lot of parents are just as happy to keep it as it is. But a lot of school districts don't feel the same way. They are a bit more concerned about the studies that show student grades dropping in the days following the start of daylight savings time. And number three, golf. This one seems like the silliest reason, but believe it or not, the golf industry is probably the biggest opponent of ending daylight savings time. Estimates show that adding one extra hour of sunlight in the evening for just 1 month can net the golf industry hundreds of millions of dollars in profit, so you can see why they would fight tooth and nail to keep it around. And they aren't alone. Any business with a vested interest in you being out of the house in the evening has a reason to support daylight savings time. That's everything from barbecue grill manufacturers to concert halls to local shops. A lot of people think the big opponents of ending daylight savings time are farmers, but that's not the case. Farmers actually hate daylight savings time, but the local Chamber of Commerce loves it, because you're more likely to go out shopping after work if there's a little more daylight left. So there you go, the big three. So are these good enough reasons to keep daylight savings time going? You can leave your opinion in the comments section, and for a real thrill, come back in 10 minutes to see 50 people tell you why you're not only wrong, but also a bad person. I'm Jonathan Soboleski for AL.com.